So I'm going to go ahead and stick my USB in my Janome. So I'll go to Open, USB. I'm just going to go backwards in the alphabet to T2, triangle. And so, my pointer, so you can see that it comes through exactly how it was on the Embird website with the 3 different objects. It automatically assigns them to needle 1 for the placement, needle 2 for the tack down, and then back to needle 1. Don't pay any attention to this black and white thread because I have my needle 1 and 2 defaulting to black and white. I can automatically assign those to a different needle since there's only 2 colors, but obviously we're only going to use 1 color anyways. So anyways, that's how it comes through, and then we want to assign it to our threads that we're using. So we'll click this arrow here, this circle on the Janome MB4. Now I can click this one to automatically assign it. This is what you use when you have like a DST file and you want to like automatically assign your colors. It just gets you started, and I can do that since I know I have black and white on needle 1 and 2. Technically I don't right now. I have red here, but normally I have white on 2 and black on 1. So I can just hit this real quick. So it basically changes them to needles 3 and 4 because those are the only open needles that I don't have defaulted. But I'm still, you know, my work's not over. That just makes life easier. The only thing I have to change is needle number 4 as far as the assignment. But I also have to tell my machine to stop after the placement, and sometimes you want it to stop after the tack down because you want to trim any pokies. So I'll have it stop after these 2, and I'll assign needle number 3 to the tack down. So you have to do it this way with my machine at least, because that way it comes through in 3 separate, you know, objects. And then you can program your machine to stop at each one. So at any rate, so I'm here. Let me just, now we're going to manually assign the needle. So it's this button here. So I'll click on that. And now it's highlighting the very first color is going to stitch on needle number 3. That's fine. But I want it to stop after it stitches my placement, so I click this red needle. So I want to change the regular ongoing needle to a red stop needle. So now the 3 turned red. So now I move down to the next needle, which is it's programmed to stitch on needle number 4, but of course we want this all the same color. So I'm going to put needle number 3, and I do want it to stop after this tack down so I could trim the pokies, so I'm going to hit the red needle. So now it's going to stop 2 times. After the placement it'll stop, and after the tack down it'll stop. So then I use this arrow to go back, and I go back again until I get to my home screen. And I just stitched my initial on there. But I wanted to show you my settings, how I have my machine set, for anybody who has a Janome, but everybody has a different preference. But for me, I'll go into settings. This is how you page through. and my grid size is 10 mils, my max is 8, hoop for monogramming is my smallest hoop. This I have set to off. This is the position that you want your needle to move to when it does trim. So your needle's going down, 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 making its locking stitch, and I have it set to off, meaning it's not going to move at all. It's going to trim right there. The needle's not going to move over a half a mil and trim. I just have it trimming right then and there. So, but if you want it to move over, you can and trim. So you can come down here, take this arrow, move down with these arrow keys, and when you're on it, you can do minus or plus with these circle keys, and you can make it, you know, go up to 1 mil. I really don't know any other reason to have that other than maybe you don't want it to trim so close to the knot because maybe you're afraid it will unravel. Maybe you want it to move away a bit. But mine is set to off, or it's set. This machine is weird. Sometimes to set it to off you have to go all the way up. Sometimes to set these things to off you have to go all the way down. So for this particular one it's all the way down. And then the next page, so I just leave it on 0 or off. That's just your thread choice. We were told in our group, our Janome group, to always have your machine ignore short stitches. And for this machine, or for my Janome, I'm going to go down to it. Off is all the way plus, but if you hit your minus button, you can also go all the way down to 0. And you would think, well, okay, is 0 and off the same thing? Well, I don't know. And I don't think people in our groups know. But mine has been set to 0 for as long as I've owned it. But guess what? I'm turning it to off because I asked a question today to somebody, and she said hers is on off. One woman had it on, like, I don't know what she had it on, maybe on 0.5 or something, and she had it, you know, turned on, and her machine was horribly stitching. It just looked horrible. There were stitches up and all over the place. I guess because it was, the machine was seeing a short stitch, ignoring it, and like jumping over it, and then, but it needed that stitch, and I guess it messed with its, the design of the design itself. I don't know if it's cumulative or what, but she said when she changed it to off, it was fine. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with my machine, but I'm going to go ahead and change it to off instead of 0 and see if there's a difference. So, that's that one. Let me just click OK because I want to make sure that it's set. So that's ignore short stitches is off. I don't think that matters as far as thread coming out of the needle, but because why would that matter? It's the tail that's being left on. But everybody says to leave it long. Thread break stitch count, this is a sensitivity. The higher the number, the less sensitive it is to a thread break. So you kind of want it high. And then this screen, jump thread trimming, I don't have it checked. Mine is off. You see there's no check mark because I don't like it to trim the jumps between anything. I like to cut my own. Unless I'm working on a really big design, sometimes I like to bury them. I work a lot with leather. So I don't have my trimming jump. So it's only going to trim a jump if I have a color stop, or, you know, like that red, when I turned it red before, when I first did this design. When I actually manually gave it a stop, or it'll trim at the end of a design. So, and of course it's going to trim at the end of a color. So if you're done with that color, yes, it's going to trim. So the only time my machine is not trimming is between jumps of the same color, basically. The way I have it set up. My machine is trimming when I manually put that color stop in for this applique. When I change that needle from black to red, it'll trim, and it'll trim after a color change. But if there's just a jump, and that jump is jumping from the same color to the same, from one color to the same color, so in other words, if I'm stitching along with red and then I have to jump over to another part of the design, still using red, my machine is not going to trim because I don't have this checked. So, and that's the way I like it, because I don't want it, if you let it keep doing that every time you have a jump in a design of the same color, you might have a lot of birds' nests and so on, and it's just a pain. It's easier to just trim it after the fact, I think. And I think it saves your machine too. So if I wanted it to trim all the time after every jump, I'd come down here and make that 1. So it would trim after every jump. I'd come up here, whoops, I'd turn that on, and I'd have it trim after every jump. Now, if you wanted to use this scenario can come in handy in certain situations. For instance, say you were stitching out the word yes in, say, black thread, and then after the word yes, you were going to jump over to another part of your design that's still using the black thread. Well, but say the letters of the word S are so thin and you're just worried about trimming between each letter because it's just, you're worried that your tie-on might be too messy when you go to the second letter and so on. So in that case, you can use this scenario, and this means that when your machine sees that there's a third jump in the design, it will start trimming. So it'll start trimming on the third jump if you have this checked and if you have a number in here of 3. So the scenario then would be, it stitches the letter Y, and then it jumps to the E. That's your first jump. Stitches the letter E, jumps to the S. So that's your second jump. Stitches the letter S, and then jumps to another part of your design using the same color. Well, that's the third jump, so it will trim at the end of that S. And I guess you're not worried about this next object because maybe it's a really big fill object and it's going to get covered up a lot, and you're pretty confident, you know, that even if it doesn't tie on so great, it's really going to be stitched over quite well. So you could use that scenario. And then, like I said before, if you have this checked and you have a number 1 here, that means it'll start trimming right away after every jump. You know, it sees 1 jump. If this is a 1, it sees 1 jump, it'll trim. It'll start trimming. And for me, I could use this with my leather and put this at a, say, I could leave it at 3 because sometimes I'll stitch a line of stitching on my leather. And then, you know, I trim the edges later when I take it out of the hoop. But that line of stitching, I want to make sure it's got a beautiful tie on and a beautiful tie off. And I mean, I burn the tie on and burn the tie off anyways when I'm done, but I still don't want to have a bird's nest because even though I'm melting the nylon threads, if you melt a bird's nest, it's going to be a lump there. It's still not going to look pretty. So what I do is I do a 1/2 inch of stitching outside on the stabilizer, jump over. So if I'm using a 3 here, it's not going to trim that jump. It stitches my line of stitching, and then I jump over to this side. That's my second jump. It's still not trimming. And I stitch a 1/2 inch over here. And then when I'm all done, you know, when I take it out of the hoop, I trim those long jump threads to like 1/8 of an inch, and then I burn them because they're nylon. So, and then usually by that time I'm done with the design. And to be honest, I would never use it because normally I'm stitching some lettering or something before I do this outline. But there have been ones where I'm just stitching the outline and I can rely on this setting. But, and you know, you can use that with that theory with cotton too, or anything else you're stitching on. But I just completely turn jump thread trimming off, so this number here doesn't even matter what's in here because this is not checked for me. Because I'll forget. And if I really do have something that I really want this to happen, then I'll come in and remember it, but I'll try and remember to right away turn it off when I was done with that design. So, but for right now, you know, mine is set to off. I'm not trimming any jumps that are of the same color thread, basically. And then this is minimum jump thread length to cut. This would be for like if you're an editor and you're doing and you're in Font Engine and Editor, and you know how you always have that jump thread between your letters, and people are like, I want that to be cut, you know. But you got to be careful because I believe I have a how-to video on, there's certain settings in Font Engine where there's a tie off, but there's not a tie on, and so on between your letters, because it says floating. Floating is a jump. So you have to be careful with that. I have a whole video on that and why I prefer to use Studio whenever I use Font Engine, just because you are sure that you have your tie off, so you could tell it how many you want, and you're sure that it's going to cut, and so on and so on. So, but if you did want a minimum thread, jump thread length to cut, you'd have to have this checked, and you'd have to tell it down here. So you'd basically have to say, I have it set off, any jump thread that's longer than 5 millimeters will get cut. That's basically what that's saying. Well, maybe you want it even smaller than that, you know, 3 millimeters. You want it to cut it. If it's going to jump 3 mils or more, you want it to trim it. Granted, remember, you still have to have that checked. The other thing, the tie-offs in Font Engine Editor, there aren't that many. There's like 3 or something, and it's just, it's like nothing. I mean, they really, it's going to unravel. So if you were going to use Font Engine in Editor, and you know, they just have their default number of tie-offs even, then you would want to, let me just bring this back to off, just to make sure. So in that case, you definitely would want these two to be checked. You wanted to put a locking stitch after your color change, even though Embered is putting one in. But then you also want to have this one checked so that it does another tie on after you've trimmed. So you definitely want to have both of these checked if you're using Editor. And I have them both checked even though I use Studio, just because I want to make sure that I have a good tie off and a good tie on. Because you never know. And sometimes our machines, when they go to tie on, the first couple of times the needle goes in, you know, we all complain how it doesn't catch right away and so on. So that's why I keep, even though I have tie-ons because I work in Embered Studio, not in Editor, I still have this checked. You can move your position, you know, by just using the buttons on your position of the needle. While you're embroidering, you can move it around. So I have that checked. So there's, you know, there's that big difference between a trim and a stop. Just because it's trimming doesn't mean it's going to stop when it goes to that next color. You know, it can trim it and then just keep on plowing through to the next color on the screen unless you put in a manual color stop with that red little needle that I did. So, sorry to be repetitive, but I know this used to really confuse me when I first started. You know, and then you read things about all other people with different machines, so it can get confusing.